right, so it seems like we are just about ready to begin. So before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Jeremy Slayton, and I'm the Vice President of the Internatus Business Club of New Jersey, also commonly referred to as IBCNJ, and I am also a senior at the Bergen County Academies in the Academy for Business and Finance. On behalf of all of our partners and other affiliates, I'd like to welcome everyone here today to our corporate communications event with Ms. Sukhi Sahni, who is the Senior Vice President and the Head of Brand Communications at Wells Fargo. Before we begin, I'd like to also mention a couple of other things. If you have any questions throughout the duration of the event, please wait until the end of the session where we will have our audience Q&A. And then for those of you who might be tuning into the online recorded version, the Internatus Business Club, or IBC, is a national non-for-profit collection of business clubs consisting of emerging student leaders with the common goal of providing value to society. IBC members have access to selective networking events, workshops, and quarterly business forums, as well as internships at select partners across the country and community initiatives. For more information, feel free to check out internatus.org. All right, so without further ado, let me allow Ms. Sahni to introduce herself and tell us more about Wells Fargo.
Well, thank you, Jeremy, and hi, everyone. Hope everybody's having a good Sunday afternoon. I have to commend you all for taking time on a Sunday afternoon. I was not as entrepreneurial as all of you are when I was back in high school, so really appreciate it. As you can notice, I've actually taken my daughter's room to do this call as well too. So if you hear any music or kids walking in, you know why. Thank you for that great introduction, Sukhi Sahni. My name actually means, for many of you who are familiar with the Indian origin languages, Sukhi means happy. So that's just who I am in general. That's something I take it to work and in life. It also means my full name is Sukhi Sahni, which really means the winner of happiness. So I think the ability to always win through hard work is just really critical. And that's something that I learned along the way. And at Wells Fargo, I actually joined this company about 4.5 months back. And there I currently lead what we call our Center of Excellences team that are really driving sort of transformational new ways to tell stories. And really trying to think through how do you showcase Wells Fargo as a brand, especially with our key stakeholders, which is both internally, which would be our employees, but then externally, as we think about media, as we think about customers, as we think about prospects, right? And the prospects vary across all generations, but we also engage a lot with the activists and the community up here in Washington, D.C., where I reside as well too. So really my goal is to take a step back and think about what's the best way to tell a story. What is the story that we want to tell? And then what are the different channels we could leverage? And then in addition to that, I also lead about 100+ team at Wells Fargo. So it's really critical for me to make sure that I'm really thinking about talent development. I'm thinking about making sure that, anybody who's working in partnership with me and more broadly at Wells Fargo, we're sort of, helping them through their development and growth. So really leading with an empathetic mindset, and having a growth mindset to grow and learn is equally critical.
Right, awesome. So before we move into our prepared questions, you had sent over a video that we are going to play now.
Awesome.
I don't think audio is being shared or off, so maybe try and stop sharing and then reshare.
find a company whose mission and people align with your needs and long-term goals. For example, in my case, a lot of my opportunities were limited based on my visa status in the United States. If I could, I would have taken more risks. Never sell yourself short. Your background, your ethnicity, your experiences are your own. And that's what truly differentiates you from everybody else. To be open, leverage the resources that the company has to offer, and most importantly, staying curious, but with a purpose. I created some structure to my calendar and I made sure I followed it. It's really, really important to know when to put your laptops down. Oftentimes I sit with my husband, my two daughters, and we have lunch together. I never really had the opportunity to do that in the past. When you can be in the office to give somebody a pat on the back, or just go by them and let them know what a great work they've done, remember to recognize them in the language that they understand. So whether it's sending a quick email as a thank you, a quick text, or just recognizing even the smallest of efforts could go a long way from now. No matter what the situation, is to be always empathetic and always assume positive intent. My children inspire me every day. I have two young, beautiful girls, 11 and 7 years old. They're funny, they're creative, they're kind, they're resilient. Often when I'm looking for answers, I go to them, and sometimes having a conversation with them and really looking at things from their eyes gives me a new perspective. They are so clean and clear in their thoughts, and sometimes having that point of view just brings a lot of clarity in my own thoughts.
All right, so that was an awesome video. Now we will move into the prepared questions portion. So I'll pass it on over to Zane, who will be leading that.
Great, thank you, Jeremy. So I'm Zane Sohail. I am the Director of Strategic Initiatives here at IBC New Jersey, and I'm also a senior in the Business Administration Magnet program at Marlborough High School. Like Jeremy said, I'll be leading our pre-planned questions for today. So Mrs. Sahni, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming and speaking to us, first of all. And our first question is, what exactly do you do as a brand communicator?
Yeah, thank you for that. So as I mentioned before, I think communicators at their heart are storytellers, right? So you almost sort of take a step back and really think through what are the different stories you want to tell. And for those of you who obviously don't know me well, I'm also a trained journalist, a broadcast journalist when I was back in India after school. And, the role of a brand communicator is, again, really thinking about what's true to your brand, right? What are your core values? What's the purpose? Really understanding who the audiences are. So, currently, as I mentioned, I just joined Wells Fargo, and previously I was at Capital One. And, a lot of our audiences varied. We were looking at people in general across different spheres, potential, high school students, and really talking to them about money and how making really relevant decisions around money could be really impactful as they continue to grow in their life and careers. We also spoke to, folks who were just starting fresh families, or maybe, getting their first job or buying their new car. Then you also look about money, and then you think about, into perspective, folks like they want to think about retirement and how do they manage their wealth, et cetera, too. So in both these areas, which was truly banks, my role was to really, again, take a step back and think about how do we communicate to all these different folks, and then what are the different channels that we can leverage. So currently in my role, I have social media. I also have a team that does media relations. I have a team that does regional communications, so they're very specific to local news storytelling. We also have an editorial team that really takes care of our own channels, which typically, if you go to any brand site, it would be the channels that they manage. And collectively, we're always thinking through is like, okay, where is the audience right now? I mean, many of you are, within that Gen Z frame, and there's different places that you go to find that information. How do we make sure that if you are the right audience, that we are showing up in that life cycle amongst all of you. So that's what brand communicators typically do. And then they work in a cross functional fashion with a lot of different folks across the company, right? Legal, compliance, the marketing teams, which are really driving sort of the more direct acquisition driven marketing. The goal for us in terms of KPIs and how we measure success as a brand communicator really is, how do you create awareness for a brand, and you create enough of an emotional connection where it inspires your potential audiences or customers to actually come back and check the brand out. Was that helpful?
Yeah, definitely. So we'll move on to our next question. So how has your childhood and specifically your education experience influence your career now, and what have you taken from that, specifically from your high school and college experiences?
Yeah, yeah, happy to. And then I think I have to share. So I actually came. Let me take a step back and feel free to, if you Google me up, and there's a really nice profile in the story that I did for the Washington Business Journal here. So it'll give you a little bit perspective into when and how I came to the U.S. But I grew up primarily in India, and I was part of a boarding school, and education. It was interesting, right? It was a very different. Time. We didn't have cell phones, so we did not have access to as much information, and we did not have laptops, right? Going to, well, your computer labs was the thing to do at that point. And if you look back into the history of Apple, do you remember like those big Apple screens with like the big CPU behind it? Right, that's what we were used to. So for us, we almost had to learn like what C plus was, some of these, Pascal was another language, etc. too. What I'm trying to offer you is like, I grew up in a world where sharing information was done through very primarily old traditional ways. I also grew up in a country where a lot of the education was, we did not have multiple style questions where you go online and how you all do it right now. I've seen my girls doing it, but everything is driven through a digital online experience. And a lot of what we did was actually in classrooms. Like we would solve the questions. I was an accounting major in my high school, as well as economics. And I actually wanted to be pursue economics in the future and become an economist. Of course, life had different plans, but we would do that all on paper and with pencil. So if any of you who are from Indian origin, that's why your parents tell you, like, get your worksheets and then try to do that with paper and pen. So that's just from perspective. But I would say growing up, my dad used to tell me, and he was in the Indian services. I'm thinking he worked for the intelligence because we never really knew what he did. But he always used to say, and education is something that's never going to go away. So he used to look at me and he used to tell me, is like, the effort that you put, you're going to reap the benefits of that, right? So you're not doing it for me, you're not doing it for your mom, you're not doing it for the community, you're doing it for yourself. And I think that from the very beginning instilled this clarification and this notion around is, everything that I do has to invest in myself, right? It's all about taking care of yourself, making sure you're using the education to the best purpose. And high school was great. So I actually, from first grade all the way to 12th grade, I stayed in the same school. It was a boarding school. My parents actually eventually moved back to India. So then I became what we called a day boarder, which basically spends all of their day and school. And I just used to go literally home to sleep. And I had a lot of focus on, in addition to academics, I was very much inclined into co-curricular. So I was in debates, I was in dramatics. I was also this, tall, pudgy, big girl that never really got the attention and was bullied in her own way. But I sort of leveraged that to figure out, what is it that makes me different, and then leverage that. I mean, I used to do sports. I was never a sports person, but they used to always put me in like sports that women with heavier build, or those who are like just have weight issues in general. So I used to do, javelin throw, and they used to put me in races, and I'm usually the one like really trying hard to run behind the scenes, but I would still get that 1 point that your house would need as well too. So I think that's just a general perspective of my childhood, my education. My parents had a big influence on me. My mom is a homemaker, but she's a very confident woman, and for her, one of the big things was, she's like, I can hardly speak English. And for her, the biggest takeaway was for all her kids to be well educated, well settled, but then also speak English really well. And I still get it here when I came to the US, and they're like, "How come you guys speak English so well?" And I was like, "Well, that was our primary language of communications. Of course, there's your mother tongue. There's a national language of India, which is Hindi." And I also think I learned a lot from my high school. A lot of who I am today, the confidence, my teachers. Some were good, some were really, really bad. And I think it's the bad teachers who had a lot more of an impact on me because they really, really pushed me, to go over the edge and try and do different things as well too. So, college, I did my undergrad at a school called Lady Shriram College. It was an all girls. So I went for a co-ed. All 12 years to an all girls college. So suddenly, this whole like drive around feminism was really critical, right? Finding your own self. And we just had these amazing women who were not only professors, but each of the women that I met and that I'm friends with, even after 25 years of passing out, um, we've just, they're many of them are doing really, really well in their careers, but many of them are just doing well in life and just being happy and content where they are too. So, which was in Delhi, by the way, New Delhi, India, and my schooling was at a school called Yadavindra Public School, which is called YPS Patiala, which is in the princely state of Punjab. In north of India as well too. So hopefully that gives you a quick view into that. But I would say a lot of who I am is because of my high school and my college. A lot of my perspectives and belief are really created through my own family members, my siblings, but also my friends. And I think that's what I tell my girls now is, it's not about just what you want to do. It's also about the company that you keep. And eventually it will have some sort of an impact as you continue to grow in your career.
Great, thank you. That was exactly what we were looking for. Moving on to our next question. Um, you've been brand communicating in multiple fields. So how have your positions or roles differed from job to job?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, when I came here, a lot of my decisions early on after I graduated with my master's degree from West Virginia University, I actually did my master's here. It was all around, who would sponsor my visa. So again, if you know of immigrants' families, and if you know of, kids in your school whose parents are, first generation Americans, you will hear that as well. And I started working at the university, and you usually get like something called a 1 year practical training at that point. And then everything that I did sort of navigated by who would sponsor my visa. So I came to DC, which was, as it's mentioned, Morgantown, West Virginia University is where I got my master's, and DC was the next big city, big location, and I've been here ever since there. But Carnegie Endowment for National Peace is where I started, and it was amazing. I really wanted to stay close to foreign affairs, really wanted to stay close to my international roots. And then just sort of having a global mindset was really critical for me. So I really worked on the research and the publication side. And then, there it was all around talking about policy and why is influencing policy so important, because at the end of the day, it impacts all of us, right? Any decision that lawmakers are making, any policy decisions that they're making, and you all have seen the sudden increase in the conversation around purpose for brands. It really stems from that. So I was really, always intrigued by this like purpose-driven communications, but through the lens of public affairs and public policy. But very quickly, I switched over to, at that point, it was called Nextel Communications. If any of you have seen first responders, they'd still use that technology. It's called Direct Connect or Push to Talk. I suddenly went from a nonprofit world to a for-profit world. And the paychecks was amazing, right? Because they pay you a lot more money, but you also work really long hours. And at Nextel, which was then bought by Sprint, which now, by the way, is T-Mobile, there a lot of what I did was product PR. So it was all about talking about technology, and we were at the cusp of launching the iPhone, which if you look back and ask me my last 20 years, what's been that iconic change that we've seen in the society has been through the launch of the Apple technology, especially the iPhone. And so I was played a big role in that. And then how do we showcase that more broadly to our customers? And then after that, I spent the last 11 years in the financial services, both at Capital One and now Wells Fargo. And again, I think what's remained a constant is storytelling, right? What's remained a constant is how do you look at those different channels? I think what's evolved is how we tell those stories. Where are the different channels? There was no TikTok a couple of years back. There was no Facebook before that, right? Social media was pretty limited. And now, because we are 24/7 engaged, we are looking to converse with everyone all the time. Everybody has different tastes. Everybody wants personalized content. I mean, all of you probably are getting hit by so much content from friends, family, brands. So I think our role has become even more important to be thinking about how do we tell real stories about the brands that we work for? Again, to create that human connection first, and then making sure that you're curious just enough to come back and say, you know what, if I'm going to be opening a bank account, I actually want to go do it with Wells Fargo because they do a lot of investment in minority owned small businesses, right? So if that's critical for you, if you're an entrepreneur and you happen to be a minority, that's an alignment of values right there. So I think that's what, but you will not know if somebody's not sharing that with you. And you will not know if it's not showing up in the channels that you typically communicate in. So that's the role that all of us play. And I think my role has evolved over the years. It has become a lot more difficult to do that. As I mentioned, we are just like inundated by content. So how do we stand out, and then how do we make that connection? But it's a continuous evolution. And I would also say, as a communicator, what's also changed is how we measure success. PR was not something that you would give money towards, right? Brand communications was always like, okay, you can do that for free. We don't really want to invest in that. That world has changed and shifted right now. And the last 2 years, because of COVID, because of our socioeconomic environment, it is very, very critical for brands to be leading with a purpose first, a value driven communications. And that's the role that I've continued to play over the past few years.
Perfect, thank you. So for our next question, we're going to try something a little different from
Yeah.
past events. We want to give you a scenario rather than just simply a question. So when asked to communicate a rebranding or and rebuilding consumer trust when doing so, just how do you go about doing so?
That's great. Well, thank you for putting me in the hot seat there. Let's see. So, as I would ask my students, I also teach at Georgetown University, the grad schools. It's usually me asking the question, but I love it. I think a couple of things that I already talked about. So let me just like go step by step. I think first you need to do an audit of what is your brand known for, really understanding the benchmarks and where you're starting, right? The second thing you would do it once you have the audit and you do a SWOT analysis, and then there are a variety of ways to do that, and you can use a lot of different tools that give you a sense. You also want to understand is what the external view is, what the internal view is, right? Because all of you, I'm sure, are getting ready for that next chapter in life, and getting ready for college application. At some point, you already are either driving your own business, or you're driving to see where there's certain brands where you probably want to work. That alignment of values, excuse me, is really, really critical. So understanding where your brand is today, from that, really thinking through where are the gaps, right, and where is the white space. Wells Fargo is a bank, so is Bank of America, so is Chase, right? JP Morgan Chase, so is Capital One. What is it that makes Wells Fargo stands out? The other thing is, understanding who is the audience that you're serving for. You can't serve all Americans. You probably do. But in order to have targeted communications, you really need to understand who do you want to go after? Are you going after the millennials? Are you going after the Gen Z? Within Gen Z, are there certain age brackets that you're going after? Are there certain regions that you really want to lean into because you know from data that that's where majority of your customers are coming through as well? Is your communications customer driven? Is it prospect driven, right? Because customer would be is you already have a relationship with the brand. Prospect would be somebody that we're trying to bring inside the brand and make them a customer as well. So again, audit, understanding the SWOT analysis, understanding where the white space is, understanding where your competitors are. I think that's really, really critical. Understanding what's the audience that you want to go after. Sometimes you will know, sometimes the data will show you that. And then from there on, you actually take a step back and think about, okay, what are the business objectives? How can communications as a function support that? And then how are you going to measure success, right? So that's the upfront. And then from that, you actually then go build your strategy, which really becomes into the tactical element. And something that I use a framework is called PESO model, which is paid, earned, shared, owned. You'll hear that a lot in communications, brand storytelling, public relations right now. But that's a way to really create integrated cross-functional storytelling. And that's something that I've continued to leverage as well. So you build that plan, and then you have to think about investments. Do you have the budget? Do you start really small in building that consumer trust by, let's say, you just want to target 15 publications and you want to do media relations. That's all you want to do, because you want to make sure you can start seeing some good stories about your brand. And then how do you continue to build upon that as well too? So again, I think just taking a very measured, very intentional, focused purview into how you build that is the critical thing. And the last thing is consistency. Like, you can't do this for like 3 months, and then say we're going to go all black. Communications has to be consistent. It has to be always on. You have to think about risk. You have to think about, what if there's a potential crisis or not. So really building a lot of that into that space.
Perfect. With that being our first scenario question, I think it's safe to assume that was successful. So now back to our last question.
Mhm.
If you could give any advice to a high school student right now, what would it be? We ask this to every speaker we have, just ask a question that's relevant to everyone in the audience.
Yeah, and that's my alarm clock going off. So I'm not going to get up and shut it off. Hopefully, it goes off pretty soon. But I would say take more risks. That's something I didn't do, and when I look back, I wish somebody would have told me that. I think go with your gut reaction. You all are part of a generation that has a lot of access to information. Some good, some bad, some relevant, some irrelevant. But make use of that information. And I think the second thing I would do is network, right? Don't look at LinkedIn only when you're looking for a job. Like, continue to build that profile. And again, I'm actually really proud of what you all are doing, and taking this time, because it's not only making you all really good citizens who are invested in the communities, but all of you are really invested in your own growth, and really starts with you. So take more risks, and just continue to listen to your gut. Like I said, you all are probably 10x smarter than where I was. So leverage that, because not everybody has that opportunity as well.
And with that, we're going to be going into our audience Q&A section. So I'm going to hand it back to Jeremy, who will be leading that.
Okay.
All right, awesome. Yeah, so those were really, I think, very insightful answers to all the prepared questions. So thank you so much. And as Zane said, we will now begin the audience Q&A. So if you have a question, feel free to just unmute and ask it to our speaker here. So does anybody have a question? And if you have a question, feel free to unmute and ask the question. All right, so we did receive a question in the chat, so we can ask that. How have your professional experiences? I know you were touching about being a professor at Georgetown. How have your professional experiences helped you pursuing that professorship at Georgetown?
It did. It certainly opens the door. And I take networking pretty seriously. If there's anybody I see or hear something, I'm not shy to reach out, because I'm also a lifelong learner. So it's really critical for me to make those connections. So, being in a company that's local to Washington, D.C., which was Capital One, that's when I started. I also didn't start with like an adjunct professor on day one. So I was actually connecting a lot with folks in the academia, and either supporting them when they had to take a day off, or when they were looking for guest speakers like this opportunity. So that allowed me to build and really understand the value of teaching and why I wanted to do it. You have to do it for the right reason, because it doesn't really pay that well, right? Like, especially for an adjunct professor, and you're doing it on top of a full-time job. And many of us have just very, very demanding careers. So being at Capital One, working with a lot of different folks who had some contacts within the academia was super helpful. And that's sort of what's landed me with the role that I have. But I think, again, if you're passionate about something, you just got to push it. I was told no at a variety of places. I actually had a great opportunity at American University, and it didn't pan out, and that was a really horrific experience. Going through that for whatever reasons. But I think you just don't take a step back, and I really wanted to teach. I really enjoy it. I always say that if there's nothing else that I want to do, and I'm really tired of my corporate life, I'll probably just recite to teaching, and maybe there's one more university I could teach it well too. So again, my professional network and where I have been has been certainly important, but it only allows you to get in the door, and from that point onward, it really comes down to you, how badly do you want it.
All right, awesome. So we'll open the floor again. If any of the audience has questions, feel free to unmute and ask. Any questions?
Sure. So once again, thank you for speaking for us today. I did have a question in terms of just your communications career in general. What do you think makes communications kind of an exciting field to work in, according to you?
I think communications is pivotal to anything that you do, right? So you could be working in a startup right now that's ready to go through an IPO, or you could be working for a large brand. Communications is the core of what we do, because I mean, what we're doing right now is also communicating. So I think recognizing the value that it brings. Again, I think it's been really, really clear in the past 2 years when all of us are working from home. Um, Suddenly we just had to pivot from where you were all in, whether it's in school settings or whether you're in office settings. Everybody just almost had to move into this digital way of talking, and a lot of it came down to the written word as well. I think communication is also critical because you can not only influence what you're sharing, but where the company really needs to focus on, in terms of their brand story, in terms of their values, in terms of defining their purpose. And again, a lot of it's driven through marketing. Marketing is when you see the ads, right? Marketing is when you see logos and some sort of hashtag. Communication is all about that constant storytelling, and a lot of it is done through earned channels where you can't really buy that story and that perception as well. So I think that's why communication is really critical. And again, it's in where the evolving nature, excuse me, of communications today is, it's all about measuring sort of the impact. We just talked about a little bit about how do you help build the reputation of a brand, of a company, could be a nonprofit. It all comes down to communications. You look at the White House today, right? Jen's responsible, for really being the voice of the president and sharing those updates with the media as well too. So again, anywhere that you look, you could look at your own physicians, right? Where you go for your parents take you, or you go for your doctor's visit. They're constantly communicating with you. When they had questions about COVID, you would go to their website and you want to find that information, right? So I think oftentimes you just think about communications different than marketing. It's pretty aligned. And it's just a way of having that two-way story and the two-way conversation with everyone. So that's why I think it's really, really critical. And I would say for many of you, given what you're doing here with your organization, and many of you probably have the desire to be entrepreneurs and have your own companies. Look at a lot of the big organizations. Look at Airbnb, Brian Chesky. I mean, he has learned the one thing that he admitted, and he and I were in a panel discussion once, and he said, I was really good at what I did. I really knew a problem, and we came up with this creative solution called Airbnb to solve for that. What he really had to learn once he became the CEO of Airbnb was to be a leader and how to communicate. And if you look back a couple of years when they laid off folks last year, the memo that he shared was brilliantly written, very transparent, very empathetic, very clear, very concise, right? That's the power of communications. So just want to share that with you, is again with the brand that probably you all associate with, but then also a leader who had all the brains and all the power and then had the right people. But if it didn't have the communications lens to it, it probably would have failed somewhere. And most organizations fail when they don't have the right communications team, or they don't have the communications team to help influence those decisions.
Thank you.
Of course.
I also had a question. I think again, thanks for coming to speak here. How do you say you like craft a unique message that kind of is like different and almost unique?
So let me see. You're saying how do you craft a unique message, correct? And it's unique in its way.
Yeah, and like make it kind of like so it's like different because I know there's like a lot of communication. So like how you
Mhm.
almost differentiate yourself.
Yeah, I think there's no magic bullet to that. You have to do your math. You have to really understand the data. You have to understand again. I think it really comes down to the audience, right? So if I'm talking to you here, and I'm pitching you all, Siddharth, something around our products, I'm going to communicate to you in a way and in channels where you are probably most active right now. What's the language that you understand? What are some of the data that I know about somebody within that audience and your generation right now? And let's say it's about pitching a brand new checking account that you want to create. So I'll almost have to really understand your persona, right? Really understand what, not just like who you are, what you do, but what do you like? What are the different keywords that you are looking for when you're searching on Google? What channels are you looking at, right? Like, where are you the most active? And then you take all of that data and then start deciphering and thinking through, okay, now that I understand my target, I'm going to go back and really start thinking through, do they speak in Twitter? If you're on Twitter only, if your entire, let's say, right, everybody like yourself is my target audience, and if you're only on Twitter, then I need to really think about 160 words, right? So I think that's how you sort of take back. And then when it comes down, it's not the words that are important. I think oftentimes we get so caught up in what that word should look like. And many senior leaders do, many CEOs of the company, C-suite folks, they really get caught up in the words. I think it's the message that you want to relay, and then the channel that's critical too. So, and again, within the advertising side, they get really creative because you have to come up with very piffy either headlines or taglines. Capital One's tagline for the longest time was, and still is what's in your wallet. When you say what's in your wallet, people recognize that it's tied to Capital One. With Wells Fargo, I don't know if you heard, it's a stagecoach, right? That's where the association comes for. But again, it's very thoughtful. But I would say it really comes down to you can get to a very creative, differentiated message if you haven't done your homework in terms of who the audience is, and then really looking at the data. So look at the psychographics, look at the audience behaviors, and then take all of that and then really get down to pen to paper at that point.
All right, thank you. That was a very insightful answer.
Of course, thank you.
All right, so I think we have time for one more question. We did receive one from the chat from a member. So they asked, how would you go about growing your network as a high schooler?
That's a great question. Well, you guys are doing a fairly good job if you're on this call today and if you're part of the group. So congratulations there. Like I said, I had none of this when I started. I would say if you all don't have a LinkedIn profile, I would just go ahead and create one, right? There's a wealth of information on LinkedIn right now. And just like any social platform, the more you search, the more you engage, right? There's algorithms in place that actually offers you the information that you're looking for. But I would just like, and I'm not asking like you have to post every day or you have to write up like your own blog or anything. Just go and read. I think sometimes reading just is very insightful. The other thing I would say is like read both opinions, right? We all have a point of views. I mean, we are living in a country that's very divided right now. So I would say if you don't agree with something, don't just shut that down. Open it up because it's for you to make informed decisions. I hope all of you are CEOs of your own companies tomorrow, right? You are not doing it right if you're only going by your opinion. You'll have to look at everything in order to make a decision. So I would say start with LinkedIn. If you're inspired by something, if you are curious about something that you read or saw, reach out to the person. The one thing that I will tell you is if any one of you right now sent me a LinkedIn and didn't really put the time and effort and say why you're reaching out to me, I'm not going to respond and I'm not going to engage with all of you. So take the time to let the person know, hey, I read this, or I saw you here, or your profile is really interesting and I want to pursue a career in communications. Would you have 5 minutes to jump on the phone with me? And by the way, can I connect with you? I would put everything aside and make that time for you. So put that time to engage with them. So I think LinkedIn is really critical. And then just, through your own network, like if there are folks in the community that you want to talk to, through your parents' network, is there anybody who inspires you? And then again, I think within your own spheres as well, too, are there folks out there? And many of you, again, I'm sure, are like getting ready or already have applied for those college applications, but look for alums, right, from those places. Like talk to them and say, what was the experience like? And believe me, their experience probably, because our generation is shifting by every year, right? Like the changes are so rampant right now with technology that what you're experiencing today is probably not going to be the same later too. So go on LinkedIn. If you don't have a profile, create one. Stay curious, reach out to folks that you want to reach out to, and don't let anything hold back. You are excited to see Indra Nui, who's the ex-CEO of PepsiCo. Send her an email. And you know what? You'll be surprised that she's actually going to respond to you. You are curious and want to talk to Simon Sinek, who talks a lot about how do you bring the why in the life that you do, right? He's a very purpose-driven storyteller. Speak to him, right? You are in somebody in entertainment, right? You maybe want to talk to X person. Just don't have the fear. Reach out. What's the worst that could happen? They might not respond. But that's how you build that, and I think just like really having that ability. And then if there are other local events, I would say connect those. But alums, your own sort of school and the network, and then LinkedIn, I think are usually your go-to right now.
Awesome. So it is 4:46, so we are a little over time. So we'll wrap it up here. For all of our members, more information about our next events will be provided soon via Slack. For many of you who have been tuning into the online recorded version, who might be interested in becoming a member of IBC, please check out any of our national chapters at internatus.org/apply. I want to take a moment to thank everybody for coming out today, and our speaker, Ms. Sahni, for taking the time out of their day to speak for us. I think we can all agree that we definitely learned a little bit about communicating and using our tools to our advantage and, reaching out to people. So I think this was insightful, not just for me, but for all of our members. So thank you again, and we hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks all. Have a good evening. Bye.